Regarding the Abrahamic faiths, question: how might these three monotheistic traditions be perceived from an outside perspective such as Buddhism? Answer: I would like to take the question a step further and broaden it to ask how all religious doctrinal systems might be viewed, quote, from the outside. This would include my own faith-based Shin or Jodo Shinshu, true Pure Land Buddhist tradition. What I would suggest is that Mahayana or Great Vehicle Buddhism, which evolved around the 1st century A.D. from the earlier Theravada or School of the Elders tradition that was founded by Shakyamuni, the historical Buddha who lived around 500 B.C., might, at least in my view, perhaps have something to contribute to answering this question regarding a so-called outside perspective. I will refer to the following Buddhist scriptures or sutras to provide my explanatory input for your consideration. The Lotus Sutra, which in its broader threefold version actually encompasses 3 different but related scriptures. The Diamond Sutra, which is one of the so-called Prajnaparamita or Perfection of Wisdom sutras and happens to have been the oldest dated printed book back in the 9th century. And the Heart Sutra, which is a smaller Prajnaparamita Sutra spoken by Avalokiteshvara Bodhisattva, also known as Kuan Yin. Getting now to actual content, a key concept from the Lotus Sutra is upaya, sometimes translated as skillful means or expedient means or tactful methods. The idea is that the Buddha preaches according to the different ways people think and the different cultures in which they reside. In other words, as I understand it, we each get messages that are geared to our own particular needs and receptive capacities. Thus, each person progresses along the spiritual path at his or her own pace, according to ability and aspiration. The various paths and traditions and religions thus evolve. Let me explain, keeping in mind, please, that I have no religious credentials other than being a devoted lay Buddhist. A basic tenet within Mahayana Buddhism is that all things we imagine to be around us are not really separate objects, that there is a kind of mysterious interconnectedness. Thus, reality with a capital R, as it truly is, can be referred to as non-dual. All things are empty of any separate existence or identity of their own. This insight regarding the emptiness of things, or shunyata, is what we Buddhists refer to as wisdom, or prajna. Isn't non-duality the essential experience of mystics in all major traditions? It is our analytical thinking mind, which is a key characteristic of us as Homo sapiens, that artificially breaks down reality into separate things. This capacity allows us to solve problems in the ordinary conventional world. However, most of us let our thinking, discriminating mind dominate, such that our actions are not guided by the wisdom which is inherent in us in the form of what some Buddhists call Buddha nature, but is clouded over by ignorance, delusion, or illusion. In Mahayana Buddhist literature, it is asserted that reality is not perfectly represented by any human thought or idea, which would include any religious doctrine. The point is that reality as it truly is beyond all words, thoughts, and concepts. The basic problem for human beings is that anyone who discriminates all the time is bound to suffer, and anyone who thinks of himself or herself as a truly separate being, or who thinks they are totally separate from God, is making a major discrimination. According to Mahayana Buddhism, none of us is, fundamentally, truly separate from the rest. When I, me, and mine are viewed as ultimately real, based on the operation of the 5 skandhas, and thus emphasized, a whole system of likes and dislikes gets created. These preferences inevitably fail to get consistently satisfied, and the result is suffering. The early form of Buddhism provided an effective path out of this dilemma of suffering, the so-called Noble Eightfold Path. The Mahayana took the Buddhist religion a major step further in an extreme altruistic direction, as I will try to describe in the remainder of this comment. The most revered path within Mahayana Buddhism is the Bodhisattva path. Because of the bodhisattva's appreciation of sunyata, or interconnectedness, he or she realizes that it no longer makes sense to pursue enlightenment only for one's own self. Thus, this insight into prajna leads naturally to a sense of compassion for those who suffer. The bodhisattva therefore makes a vow, actually several great vows, to defer his or her nirvana, or enlightenment, or liberation from suffering, pending complete fulfillment of an agenda to save all sentient beings, to get all beings on board the great vehicle that leads to the other shore beyond suffering. That said, an important paradox identified in the Diamond Sutra is that even though the bodhisattva vows to save all beings, he or she recognizes that there are actually no separate beings. Additionally, he or she is even cautioned against becoming attached to the concept of emptiness. In any case, the bodhisattva, out of compassion, chooses to exercise discrimination, to use the thinking mind in order to figure out ways to help people on their own terms. From this standpoint, which can be considered for our discussion to be outside, he or she has no rigid vested interest in arguing for or against any particular ideas or doctrines. The only standard is to determine how beings can be helped to suffer less, with the only objective being to help the sufferers. The bodhisattva is able to provide relief for many. It should be noted that this doctrine, or dharma, or teaching, which in an ultimate sense is really no doctrine or dharma, cannot be fully grasped with the thinking mind. Again, it is in the nature of thinking to be dualistic. Even as the nature of our own being is mysterious and incomprehensible, so is this great vehicle law mysterious and incomprehensible. The Buddha, or Tathagata as he is sometimes called, or God, or Jesus if you prefer, has seen all the laws and understands the sense in which they are inexpressible, utilizing ordinary language and concepts. Nevertheless, he deeply desires to help suffering beings. Therefore, he preaches variously to them, using tactful power via skillful means, so that they will be able to hear his messages and make progress. I personally believe we are always receiving these teaching messages, and that providing them to us, calling to me with sympathy and support in recognition of my pain, is the main function and activity of Buddha or God. In Buddhism, he is not seen as judge, but only as wisdom and compassion. By the way, the Trikaya, or three bodies doctrine is quite interesting and relevant here, but beyond the scope of what I intend to cover. So, to summarize, Buddha, or God, has taught many laws or doctrines. He teaches laws that have different meanings to different people. He knows that different people, according to their ability and aspiration, will make different rates of progress. It is as if the Buddha facilitates in humans the creation, adoption, and encouragement of positive illusions or myths to replace ones that are more likely to result in harm, positive and negative always being defined in terms of suffering and spiritual development. In Mahayana Buddhism, it is taught that eventually all illusion can be given up, and reality as it is can be directly experienced. I will close with a quotation from the Sutra of Innumerable Meanings, which is the opening sutra in the Threefold Lotus Sutra. This is from the Kosai Publishing Company version. As natural desires are innumerable, preaching is immeasurable. As preaching is immeasurable, meanings are innumerable. The innumerable meanings originate from one law. This one law is, namely, non-form. Such non-form is formless and not form. Being not form and formless, it is called the real aspect of things. The mercy which bodhisattvas display after stabilizing themselves in such a real aspect is real and not vain. They excellently relieve living beings from sufferings. Having given relief from sufferings, they preach the law again, and let all living beings obtain pleasure. I hope that some of what I've spoken here makes sense to you. Thank you for taking the time to listen. In Gasho, Namo Mita Boots, Namo Mita Boots, Namo Mita Boots.